Welcome to the League of Women Voters program on new presidential primary and precinct caucuses. I am Patty Robles, a member of the League of Women Voters Wayzata Plymouth area and your moderator for today. This would be a good time for everyone to pull their phones out and remember to silence them. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. LWV Minnesota promotes political responsibility through informed and active participation in government and acts on selected governmental issues. Membership is open to all persons 16 and over. For more information about the League of Women Voters, visit www.lwvmn.org. We would also encourage you to become a member as we provide service to our community and to join us in the nonpartisan studies of local, state, and national issues. LWV does not support or oppose political parties or candidates. In 2016, the Minnesota legislature passed bipartisan legislation to officially move to a presidential primary system in 2020. This is an important step toward making it easier for eligible Minnesotans to make their voice heard in the presidential nomination process. The move will increase access and opportunities to vote for many Minnesotans, including those serving in the military, the elderly, and the disabled. Instead of having just 1 hour on one night to vote, Minnesotans will now have access to many of the benefits they've come to expect from our regular election process, including no excuse absentee voting, same-day registration, and opportunities for those serving overseas. Caucuses will still be maintained for all other elected offices. This morning's program will start with our presidential primary speaker, followed by our speaker, one of our speakers, by the way, I have to say one of our speakers from the Republican representative for the caucus is ill, and so she was unable to make it. But we do have the representative from the DFL to talk about the caucuses. So that will follow our presidential primary speaker. Our first speaker will be Michael Wall, voter outreach specialist for the Office of the Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon. Mr. Wall spends his days connecting people to the power of our representative democracy and their place in it, helping people learn and utilize the registration and voting process and educate themselves on candidates and issues, and generally feeling that he is so very, very lucky to be supporting the idea that your vote is your voice. His professional background is in secondary and higher education and relationship development. He pines for the next time he and his family will own a dog to play in the leaves that are sitting in his lawn right now. Michael may be reached at michael.wall@state.mn.us. Michael. Here's Michael Wall. In addition, we have, if you have questions, please raise your hand. And we have a couple of high school students that can come and pick your question up, and we'll use those to ask Michael after he's done with his presentation. Thanks.
I'm wondering if we can, yes. How is that? Can everyone hear me? Great, no need to mess with that. Good morning, thank you for having me here. I've done a little theater, so I need a little vocal warm-up. I have two phrases that I like to use to warm my voice up. So let me try this. I'm not a lawyer and can't interpret the law for you. That question is better asked for my colleague from the DFL. Okay, I think we're ready to go. I'm not going to read directly from the slides, so this slideshow is available. I've given it to the fine folks at the League, and you can get a copy of it from them. There are lots of notations about statutes, and so lots of detail you can get. And please do utilize the cards. I'm happy to answer any question I can. Note on the first slide that there are two dates. You may want to know about 3 dates regarding the presidential nominating primary, but the date in between March 3rd, which is the actual primary election day, and January 17th, the opening of voting early by absentee ballot, either in person or by mail, is the caucus date, a week before. Personally, I find it interesting that you have the opportunity to discuss with like-minded people at your caucus before you go and cast that vote. So it's a great opportunity, and I'll talk a little bit more about the fact that the caucuses still exist, and will be, well, don't want to get into that, but the actual meat of the caucus we'll talk about. So let's see if I can, what am I going to cover? What is this presidential nominating primary, which I will probably just start calling the PNP, if that's all right with you. That'll save us about 5 minutes for this presentation. Why are we doing this? Don't we have a caucus? We've always done the caucus. Who is running it? Not, by the way, a simple answer to that. Who can vote in it? How will it work? Will a voter's party choice be recorded? And some time for the questions that you will ask on your cards. So, the PNP is a regular election. It is, as we were informed, it's what you have come to be used to for every other vote you do, going to your precinct, if you want, on election day. Instead of a small window of time, you have the opportunity to vote in most locations from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You have the chance to vote early, if you like, either in person or by mail. All of the things that normally decorate our election system are now a part of this. You may see participation from the 4 major political parties. And do I have the next one? Nope. I've got a list. Oh, that's what I wanted. Thank you. All right. I'm not going to touch this thing unless I need to. So you'll see at the bottom, you may or may not know that we have 4 major political parties in Minnesota. And major political party status is receiving 5% or more in the previous election. Participation in the PNP for a major political party is being a major political party and having delegates sent to a national convention. So those are the criteria for participating as a party in the presidential nominating primary. Each party, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, by the way, there will be some repetition for stress. So if you feel like you've heard me say something before, you have. Each party will have its own ballot. How many people have voted in an August statewide Minnesota primary before? Do not expect columns, which you have to pick one. Nope. You will go to your polling place or request an absentee ballot, and you'll be asked which ballot you would like to vote on. You will have that one party's ballot, and we'll talk about what will be on that ballot, and vote it, turn it in. So we'll talk more about that too. Nothing will be on that ballot but the nominees, or the possible nominees, the candidates for that party for president. That's it. Every other primary vote that you will be able to do in 2020 will be August 11th for the statewide primary. So this is, what this really is taking that preferential vote out of the caucus, just picking it up like one grape off the bunch and putting it on its own. So if you remember casting that preference vote at your party's caucus, it will basically be that a little bit on steroids, giving you more opportunities, longer opportunities to vote. All right. Go. Why are we having this? In 2016, and let's take a little poll, how many people went to their caucus in 2016? How many people would classify it as a much more crowded experience? as a reaction to voters' comments about the 2016 caucuses, the legislature worked with the major parties at the time and came up with legislation that everybody liked enough to vote for and could live with, to do that plucking the grape off of the bunch and taking that vote and making it more accessible to voters in Minnesota. That's really what happened with the passing of the law in 2016. It is not, though, unique in our history. We have 1916, we had a presidential nomination bribery, 52 and 56, and again in 1992, fairly recent history. So this is not new for us, although the process may be a little tweaked from some of those earlier elections. Caucuses, as I said, will still take place a week before the PNP on the 25th of February. For the rest of the party business, a caucus normally does. Yes, you have to say, I would like that ballot out of the possibly 4. By the way, the participation in the PNP by these 4 parties, they have until the end of the year, December 31st, to say whether they're going to actually be a part of it. We certainly expect, well, I do, the DFL to be a part of it. There are, what, like 87 candidates right now? We've already received the ballot from the state Republican Party. 1 or 2 of you might have cracked the code and seen an article about it online somewhere. And the other 2 parties have not told us whether they're going to participate. So you go in and you say your name, just as you normally would. They look you up on the roster judge will look you up, or you request an absentee ballot and they'll check you at your county. And you also, when you request an absentee ballot, you check which ballot you want mailed back to you. In your polling place, they will ask you to non-publicly. It's not going to be in a way where you say, I would like to vote for the legal cannabis now. No one around you is going to know. There may be actually each county may be doing it slightly differently, but there'll be a way for you to say which ballot you want without others knowing. Ma'am? So, she said until they share the data. The law that was passed in 2016 states 2 things. One, that it's not public data, which means any Minnesota registered voter has the right by law to request voter data, public data, a list. This will not be on it. But it will, according to law, be shared with the 4 major parties. Not who you vote for, there's no way for them to know that, but which ballot you chose. That individual piece of information will be shared along with the voters' names, etc., the other public information, with the 4 major parties. I encourage you, if you don't like that, or if you like that, to share it with your legislator. That's where this came from. When you, another question some people have asked is, how, if you're not affiliated with a particular party, how are you monitoring, they ask us, who gets what ballot? Usually, you sign an affirmation, an oath, that says, yes, I am the person on the roster that I say I am, so when you give me this ballot, I'm swearing to it, and it's a felony to lie for this oath, that this is me. There is a new paragraph, which, by the way, is not punishable by a felony, but the new paragraph you are swearing to as well is, and I'll read it for you, I am in general agreement with the principles of the party for whose candidate I intend to vote. So that is the process for saying this is a ballot that applies to me, and I am who I say I am, and I would like that ballot, please. And then the rest of the process is exactly what you're used to in voting, and then putting in the tabulator, etc. I think we're doing questions on cards. Sorry.
Could you please repeat that sentence?
Sure. Yep. This is in law, by the way, so if you get a copy of this.
Just the one you start with, and I'm in general
Yep.
agreement.
Yep. I'm seeing if I have it here. I don't think I put it here, but the statute, I'll say for the recording, is, let's see, 204C.10 subsection B. I am in general agreement with the principles of the party for whose candidate I intend to vote. Got it? Oh, okay. Who's running this circus? This is a function of the party's need to run a primary. It has been in, again, I'm not a lawyer, but there have been court decisions, including, I believe, a Supreme Court decision, that says the government can't tell the party how to run, any party, how to run its business. So the law that was passed in 2016, where the parties, and I believe at the time it was just the two major parties, and the legislature saying, this system that we've got doesn't work for us, doesn't work for voters. How can we create a primary that satisfies the voters and the parties? So the parties need, you can correct, where'd it go? Wow, ran already. Why are the primaries, the preference vote, why have they generally been in caucuses in Minnesota? Because you have to sign in at your caucus so they know who's voting. The parties had the right to say, if you want us to sign on, we want to know who's voting for our party. And might as well just give us all the list so we know who is taking which ballot. That's why it's a part of the law, because we needed the parties to agree or they wouldn't have to abide by it. Okay, let's see. So, the state is running the election for the parties. That's the easiest outline. And the law was a compromise, which every law maybe should be, that's the civics teacher in me. But the law is a compromise between what the parties want ideally and the voter experience and accessibility and ease of voting. Okay. The candidates on the ballot, party choice, just like they have been. They have until 12/31, until New Year's Eve, when the office closes, to say who is going to be on their particular party ballot. But once they've submitted it, that's it. And I'm just talking about the list of candidates. So people have asked about the state GOP ballot that was already submitted. New names, printed names cannot be added to that ballot. The law says once you pass it in, it's set in stone. So that is the decision for allowing write-ins and for saying which write-ins will be counted, which is a standard election practice. That they have until December 31st to update or change. There's nothing in the law that says anything other than make sure that it's set and turned in by the 31st of December. Okay, talked about that, good, good. Oh, sorry. Whether to have a write-in can be decided by 12/31, but which names are to be counted, that actually can be decided up to a week before. So caucus day is the last day that a party can say, we want these write-in names actually counted for us. Who can vote in the PNP. Everyone who can vote for anything else. There are, by law in Minnesota, certain requirements for voting. They're the same ones we normally have. Citizenship, 18 by election day, which means if you're turning 18 on March 3rd, you can vote early absentee on January 17th because the law says on election day you must be 18. You need to be a resident of Minnesota for 20 days. Residency is a whole nother thing, but know that if you are traveling for a week or 2 weeks before the election day, or you're a student, or you have a child or grandchild who's a student, and they are out of state, that doesn't take away their residency. Residency is a declared thing. So you can travel, you can go to school and still be a Minnesota resident. And you must be finished with all parts of a felony sentence. What does that mean? It means that anything attached to your sentence as a convicted felon must be satisfied. You have to be what's called off paper. You have no more obligation. You have been discharged. That's the word that the law uses. That person can then register to vote and participate in the system. See? If you're under guardianship, you can still vote unless a court has said that you cannot. And if you've been ruled legally incompetent, again by a court, the court's the only one who can take away the right to vote, then you can't participate either. How is it going to work? So the question really is the PNP run differently than a state primary? Not really. In general, it's the same process of registration, voting, counting, all of those things are the same. The key difference is having to request a particular party's ballot and then having that as a part of the voter record, the voter history, not a public part as we said, and having that choice be a part of a list that's given to all of the major parties. We talked about separate ballots being printed. So there are a couple of ways to hold a primary. An open primary is anybody can vote for any party. We have that in our August statewide primary. You can go in and pick your column. You have to stay within that column. We can't, we don't allow jumping from party to party in the statewide primary, but there's nothing that says you have to choose a column you've chosen before. Here, you have to at least make that declaration that we talked about before, but it has nothing to do with who you vote for in August or who you vote for finally in November. Those choices are up to you. There is no obligation because of the ballot you chose. There is, again, as we talked about, a slight history that's recorded, but so the PNP is more like a closed primary, although it's not strictly a closed primary. How will it work? Part two. We talked about publicly affirming their support of the principles of the party, publicly being that it's a matter of record. But you don't have to be a declared member of any party to do this. We talked about I am general agreement a couple of times. Non-public, yep, we talked about that. Good, good, good. Anytime you want. Yep, got that. So did you want to ask?
Yeah, let's start asking some questions since we have a lot of questions and we don't want to miss an opportunity to ask some of them. So one of the most frequently asked questions, I'm going to combine questions together so that we have an opportunity to answer as many as possible. It has to do with the giving the information when you decide to the political parties of the voters' ballot choice. And one of the questions is, or the majority of the questions have to do with, is that list shared with all 4 groups? Is it shared only with the group of the one that they chose?
All 4 groups get a list of everyone who voted and which ballot they chose.
And will local party units have access to the preference ballot information as well as the larger parties? So for example, districts have access to that information as long as the larger DFL party. Or is that
That's a question best addressed to my colleague from the DFL. The law says we have to give it to the party. There's no distribution information in the law beyond that.
How much is this going to cost the taxpayers?
That's in a later slide, but rounded up to $12 million.
And what fund is that coming from?
I have no idea. My wife holds our checkbook. They don't, the state level, I have nothing to do with the money.
And so there are no legal, back to the first question, there are no legal restrictions on how the major parties use that primary data? Is there any legal, you're not a lawyer, but.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not aware of any, but I haven't really delved into that part of the statute. We good for now?
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Your rights as a voter for the PNP. Everything you know to be true for the rights of a voter for any other election is true here. We have the Minnesota Bill of Rights, Voters' Bill of Rights, which is a matter of law. Everything applies, including getting time off from work to vote, all of those things. Bringing in a sample ballot, if you want to, now again, we only have 1 race on each ballot, but you have the right under Minnesota law to bring in a sample ballot that you've marked up to help remind you who you actually wanted to vote for, which may be more of a Democrat issue than a Republican issue at this point. I really like working for the Secretary of State's office. I hope I didn't do anything to myself there. The results bind, according to law, the election of delegates for each participating party. That's part of the law too. What does that mean? It just means that once the parties have chosen how many delegates there will be from different levels of the party, and these are elected delegates, so if the party has automatic people who are national delegates, it doesn't apply there. But if there are on the state level, just throwing out easy numbers, 10 national delegates that will be elected at that state party convention, and only 2 candidates get votes, and it was 50-50, they'll split the number of delegates to the national convention, 50% or 5 for one candidate and 50% or 5 for the other candidate. Was that not clear?
What if it's 60-40? I mean, what if
Then it would be 6 and 4. So the binding means that, and I'm trying to use the easiest examples I can, but if only 2 candidates get votes and it was 60-40, then they split however many delegates on each level. The congressional delegate from one district, maybe, let's say they have 6, and if you have a 60-40 split, they have to split up theirs as close to 60-40 as possible, and then if there's an extra delegate, the party will figure out how they're going to either draw lots or something for where that last delegate goes. So that's what it means, what the law means when they talk about binding the election of delegates. It's got to stay for elected delegates in that percentage as long as they meet the minimum, which I believe may be a party decision, but the 15% number comes to mind as a minimum. Write-in votes are allowed, but it's the choice of the party. And as we said, whose write-in vote gets counted, also the choice of the party.
I think that's kind of confusing to me, maybe to everybody else. How do they know who, if I want to write in Mickey Mouse, how do they know I want to write in Mickey Mouse before the actual election? Or they just say no one will be counted unless it's an approved write-in before?
That's the way write-ins work, yep. So, for other elections, and other than the presidential primary, when there is a write-in, there still has to be a declaration of whose write-in do you actually count to be able to return results. That's all this is. Because there is, I'm not on this level, but you can imagine that the number of Mickey Mouse votes doesn't really have anything to do with the real election. And though it might be seen as a protest vote, there's nothing to do there. So if, and Kay can talk to this, but if there is enough recognition that there are viable write-ins, maybe that's the basis for the decision, but that's a party decision, not ours. We follow, according to the law, what the party tells us in that regard. Does that help? Okay. We talked about the choice being recorded already. Private data, the law actually says this is private data, except for that statute that says we're going to give it to the major parties. That's really what it says. But, and, yeah. I have a bolded note for myself. Yes, they do, sir. It's important to know that, and maybe this is comforting to you, maybe it isn't, but the extent of that information that goes to the four major parties does not include who you voted for. And if it's a comfort, that is ultimately the piece of data that we don't want anyone to ever know. Party affiliation, the parties for a primary really demanded we must know who votes for us, and that led to, we're just going to give the whole list to every major party who's participating. Actually, I don't believe it says they're participating. So if one of the two new major parties doesn't participate, they'll still get the list because they're a major party. Yeah, we talked about it. Okay. Is it constitutional, this whole thing with telling the parties, you know, that I'm not a lawyer, but there actually is case law, Democratic Party of the United States versus Wisconsin is a case that was referenced in some of the things I was reading that basically said what I told you before. This is party business, and the government can't tell the party how to run its business. It can't. So the law is a compromise, as I said before. The PNP, I wrote for myself, is not a normal state election. It's a party primary. That's why there are multiple ballots, to be able to track. And it is a party process. The state is used to run the election, but it's not our election. It's the party's election. And the party's procedural rules are the party's business as well, and the government can't affect that either. So the apportionment of delegates that we talked about before, that must happen as a part or after the party does what the party does with saying how many votes this congressional district will have, how many delegates, how many will be elected at the state. That's all party stuff, and once they have that, then those percentages, meeting the minimum, those percentages have to be honored. And we really talked about that. And some frequently asked questions stuff. The original estimate that I read was somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. The last estimate I read, which I believe my boss said, Secretary Simon, was $11,900,000 for the fiscal year. There is a cost of doing business, ma'am. I see you shaking your head. And it is a cost that the state took on with this law as a matter of accessibility to the process for voters. And is it a lot of money? It depends on whether $11,900,000 is a lot of money to you, but is it worth it? That's another question you have to ask yourself. By the way, in 1992, when the last time we had a presidential primary, it was after that election, it was suspended, and then in 1999 was reversed. So there isn't a huge history of primary because it needs to be thought of as worth the cost and the process. So will this stick after 2020? Don't know. But your legislators, whose your next call should be to, if you want to support or go against that. And there we are. That's what I've got.
All right. Why has a Republican primary, why is there going to be one if it's been decided that only Trump will be on the ballot in Minnesota?
You'll need to address that to my Republican colleague who didn't show up. The law,
who is sick?
Yeah, Becky has a stomach flu. The law doesn't say that a major party gets to participate if they have a need for the primary. It just says major party with a national convention that delegates will be sent to may participate. So it's their choice.
Does the list, are there any restrictions on how the list can be used by the different major parties?
We talked about this before a little bit. There is nothing in the law that says how that list can be used. There's nothing, as far as I know, in that law that says who they can give that information to. The press, locals, nothing in it. It's the party's decision how they want to use that. And again, if you think about signing into your caucus, there's also nothing on those rosters that I recall that say, don't worry, we won't share this with anyone. So the law doesn't, as far as I know, I'm not a lawyer, but the law doesn't say anything about what they can do with that, just that that list must be provided. It's a shall, I believe, shall be provided.
Okay. Is a crime committed if somebody signs in and they don't agree with the general agreements of that policy? Is that a crime? I know you addressed that. I know you're not a lawyer.
I actually put something. Restoration of civil rights. I added something to my own notes that talked about that specifically. I've got it in here. I will find it.
Okay, well, you're looking for that.
Oh, here we go.
There we go.
204C.10 subparagraph B says, at the presidential nomination primary, the polling place roster must also state, I am in general agreement with the principles of the party for whose candidate I intend to vote. This statement must appear separately from the statements required in paragraph A, and that's the, I swear that I'm telling the truth and I am who I say I am. The felony penalty provided for in paragraph A does not apply to this paragraph. That's what the law says. It doesn't say if anything else, but it says it's not a felony if you lie about that. That would be a great question for your county attorney.
If a candidate drops out prior to the PNP, their name still was submitted to the ballot. Their name still appears on the ballot. Is that correct?
Yep.
And if somebody shows up, okay, this is a hypothetical. Somebody shows up for a GOP ballot, and they don't vote for the candidate on the ballot because there's only one. Does their name still get submitted, and does their ballot count?
Okay. There, there, I'm not quite sure who the there of is their name submitted. So let's,
Give a list to the GOP, submitted to that list to all the parties, major parties, because they showed up and they got a ballot.
okay. So a couple of possible answers here. If there is a write-in, which Jennifer Carnahan has stated publicly there will be, then what you write in is your vote and will be taken in with the rest of every other vote. If you have voted for someone as a write-in who is on the GOP's list for those write-ins to be counted, that will be counted. If you voted for me or Mickey Mouse, that will not be counted. So hopefully that answers that. But if you you sign in, you get your ballot, you put it blank in the tabulator, then it's your ballot choice that is on that list. So you don't get your ballot from the ballot judge until the roster judge has you affirm who you are and that you generally agree with the principles of the party you have already told the roster judge you want. So once you're handed that ballot, it's your ballot. And by the way, you can spoil that ballot, and I'm sorry, this is kind of funny to me thinking about I voted for the wrong person on the GOP ballot, I don't know, but let's say that you put in a write-in on the GOP ballot and you say, no, I want to vote for President Trump. You can go back and say, I want this ballot spoiled and I'd like another GOP ballot. But you can't say, change my mind, I want to vote for the DFL or the legal cannabis. Once you make that choice, that's it, that's your ballot. Hopefully that answers that whole question.
Yes. Let's see, are absentee ballots counted? Are they only counted if the vote is too close to call?
All in Minnesota, all absentee ballots are all counted during the 7 days. That's when they start opening them and putting them into tabulators, the 7 days before an election, which, by the way, is when you go to your county or other early voting site during the 7 days before, you are, for the most part, able to put your ballot directly into a tabulator. You're not going to be given an absentee ballot 3 days before because they're already counting ballots. That's not the case, I believe, in every county, but pretty much that's what you'll see. That 7 day period also allows, by the way, for you to claw back, to spoil your absentee ballot. Kay asked me this question that somebody asked her, I believe, or it might have been your question, but what happens if you are a DFL voter and there are 10 people on the presidential, we'll see how many there are, but let's say there are 15 candidates on that ballot for the DFL and you vote on January 17th and then your candidate, your choice, drops out. Minnesota law allows you to spoil your absentee ballot and either get another one or vote on election day. So if something happens, you can change your mind as long as it's before that 7 day period.
That's what I wanted to make sure you said.
Yes.
Let's see. This is a very specific. How much time after felony obligations completed is a former felon eligible to vote?
The minute they receive the notification that they are off paper, that they have satisfied everything. Again, the law says discharged. That's it, because it's a light switch. You're either able to register or you're not. There's no time limit.
Let's see. Will the state help to defray the additional election costs of the primary for local governments?
That's what most of the 11,900,000 is. The law allows for and has processes for reimbursing counties and municipalities for the costs of doing the PNP election. So we've asked, I know that even in our elections department, there are some folks who are tracking hours, but the counties and the municipalities are supposed to be tracking their costs, and then they basically submit a bill at the end and will be reimbursed for those costs. So this, although it's brain power and time, the cost of doing this falls on the state. That's what the law laid out.
And parole is not considered off paper, correct?
If you are on parole, you're on probation, if you have restitution that, according to your sentence, you must pay, all of those things must be satisfied for you to go off paper, for that conviction to be discharged, and for you to be able legally to register again.
Let's see. Very similar. There seems to be a lot of questions and concern about the amount. It's very high. People feel it's very high. Why should the state have to spend up to $12 million to run elections for parties? And is sharing the information with parties jeopardizing nonpartisan elections or making them more partisan? And is this just party business? How do you reconcile?
So it is just party business. It's helping the parties do what they will do anyway. But I ask you, I can't answer for you whether it's worth $12 million. But I can ask the question of, if you review in your own head, how many people actually, let's say before 2016, actually showed up to participate in that presidential preference vote at caucuses versus the number of people who vote in a regular election. It is vastly different. And part of that is, I think mainly it falls into three categories from my work in outreach and talking to people. One is caucus. What's a caucus? Another is, really? I've got an hour? I have to be that only day on that hour? And the third is, caucus? What's a caucus? So a lot of people didn't participate in that presidential preference voting because they are unfamiliar with the caucus system. Some people don't like the caucus system. I will tell you in 2016, personal story, that at my polling place, there was no one chosen to lead the session. So they had to find someone who was willing, and they weren't familiar with it was chaos, and there were people lined up. We fit everyone we could in that room, and there were people in the doorway, and it went out into the hall, all waiting for a chance to vote. Should that be the case, is one of the questions you need to ask yourself. And if it shouldn't, if things should be more accessible, and that's the key term to me, that's why I keep repeating that. If voting for the nominee for your party should be more accessible than an hour on a particular night, then we have to pay the cost of the system that allows people to do what we do in Minnesota, which includes election day registration. You know, there are about 30,000 election judges that get paid for an election, which is phenomenal that we have that system, but it's a bill. That bill's got to go to somebody. And this law brings it to the state. The state's picking up the bill. And the other thing that we have that a lot of states don't is the ability to vote absentee because you want to. When I speak to college and high school groups about no excuses absentee voting, which I will, shameless plug, say that my boss, Steve Simon, is the one who brought that bill to the legislature when he was a state legislator. But lots of states don't give you the chance to vote absentee unless you swear, and this is the way it was in Minnesota beforehand, you swear that you can't get to the polls. I tell young people, if you want to stay in your dorm room to play video games and order a pizza on election day, you can and still be a part of the process because you don't have to go. We are at about 25% of people voting from home now, voting using early voting. And we only expect it to grow because if you enjoy going to your polling place, great. But if you don't and you want to be a voter, you should have options. And that's what our system is about. And all of that costs money.
All right, I would just ask you to give your one last important point for everybody to know, and then we'll move on to our caucus.
Wonderful. Thank you for
Thank you
having
so
me
much.
here. Thank thank you all. I'm going to leave some cards. My information is on here as well, and that's Nasser Musa, who also works in outreach, the director of outreach for the office. My one final summary statement is a cutting off your nose to spite your face comment. No matter what you think of this process, in 2020, if you would like to be engaged and a part of your party's selection for who the nominee should be, do it. Make your statements, talk to your legislators, talk to your parties about any changes you think should happen for the system, but participate. That's what I would suggest to you. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Michael, for coming out on a Saturday when you could be raking leaves and sharing some really important information with us. Next, we're going to talk about the caucus and the caucus process, because we'll still, not only will we have the primary, but we're also going to have the caucus system still going on for all the other elections. The 2020 precinct caucuses will be held on Tuesday, February 25th at 7 p.m. at locations set up by the parties. Michael brought up a great point. If you're interested in talking to people with like-minded views, it's a great place to go and sort of share your ideas and get other people's ideas. Precinct before the general election, or before the primary election. Precinct caucuses are meetings run by Minnesota's political parties. They are the first in a series of meetings where parties may endorse candidates, select candidates, and set goals and values called party platforms. Who can participate in caucus? To participate, you must be eligible to vote in the November 2020 general election and live in the precinct. You also must generally agree with the principles of the political party hosting the caucus. What happens at the caucus? Each political party runs their caucus meeting a little bit differently. Generally, there are three main activities at a caucus. Choose volunteers who will organize political activities in the caucus, discuss issues and ideas for the party to support, and choose delegates who will endorse candidates at future conventions. Our next speaker, and as I mentioned, our GOP speaker was unable to attend due to illness, but we do have Kay Lewis. She's the Secretary of the Congressional District 3 Democratic Farmer Labor Party. So join me in welcoming her.
Good morning. Had I known that Becky wouldn't be here, I would have asked my brother to join us today. I am an officer of the DFL party. My brother is an officer of the Republican Party. And if you want to know how Thanksgiving is in my family, it's very stressful. So I recognize a lot of faces in this room, so I know some of you are familiar with caucuses. Who has not attended a caucus before? That makes me happy that most of you have. And so I think between Michael and what you just said, everyone has a pretty good idea of caucuses. So I want to speak mostly about the presidential primary, which literally changes very little for how caucuses work. It just takes this one small section of the presidential primary and plops it into a wider thing, which the DFL likes and is a big fan of, because it increases participation by allowing people more time to vote for their presidential choice at their leisure, which I love and wholeheartedly support. Like she said, caucuses are on Tuesday, February 25th at 7 p.m. I'm hoping for good weather. If not, then I'm hoping for weather that doesn't make roads terrible. A late February primary runs into that risk, which furthermore goes into why I like a presidential primary and spacing things out and giving people time to vote. I will probably be voting in the primary on the first warm day that I can. I just have to hope that one of our 9,000 candidates doesn't John Kerry me. I do not know entirely how it goes on the other side of the aisle, but I do believe it is something very similar.
You know, I think that this platform might be better if you just have a question, raise your hand, and maybe ask. There.
So normally, I've caucused for a long time. Normally from our Senate district conventions, we would caucus to represent a certain candidate to the state convention.
Correct.
And that was just dependent on your walking sub-caucuses and if you could get enough people to support you to go on to the state. But now this year, the primary will happen before those state conventions.
Yes.
I mean, before the Senate district conventions. So it'll happen right before the Senate district conventions. And say we've got, just to be simple, there's 3 candidates that are above that 15% threshold, and you've got, 5 for number 1 and 3 for this candidate, 2 for that candidate. We would have to sub-caucus and move on to the state with those percentages, right? Does that make sense?
Kind of.
So
The process itself.
So your question is that because of the timing of the primary versus the caucus and Senate caucus, is that what you asked?
Well, more, it's, the primaries are going to determine who we're going to the state convention for, as opposed to what happened on that Senate district caucus floor.
So the process is still the same. The only thing that the presidential primary is determining is how many delegates each people will get. So on caucus night, you can still have a preference, but we won't be asking for it this time. Everything else and all of the other candidates that you would be supporting is still the same. Everything is still the same, it's just this one piece has been removed from us and put into a large context. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So for us on caucus night with our 9,000 candidates, we just start talking about those candidates that night. If you were to raise your hand and to say you wanted to be a delegate, you would be giving your choice for all of the other candidates. People might ask who you're supporting in the presidential race, and you can tell them, but it's not a declaration at that point who you would be supporting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going beyond, it's not about, I mean, it is out of the precinct caucuses, that determination is from the Senate district to the state convention.
That question might be something might need to delve in more with your actual DFL representative in your area, because I think I see what you're saying, and it may be that there needs to be a little bit more figuring out of the question to answer it in a way that could satisfy your question before. Does that make sense? Yes.
So at the caucuses, we will be electing delegates to our Senate district for organizing unit conventions.
Correct.
The Senate district or organizing units are still going to be nominating for the House seat, the 2 House seats in their district and the Senate for the state.
Correct.
So that will still go on, but there will still be a primary
Yes.
for those 3 seats.
Okay, so the question is, even though we're still caucusing for the state seats, will there still be a primary in August?
Yes.
Is that
For
your
those 3
question?
seats.
For those
Okay,
3
so
seats.
whatever endorsement we may make then will change depending on who wins those primaries.
Correct, like it is now.
Okay.
I have an easy question. I haven't looked ahead to the schedule. The state convention rotates between 2 cities. Can you tell me what city it's going to be in this year?
The question is, what city is the state DFL convention this year?
Rochester.
Rochester.
I didn't think about that one. It is Rochester again. Yes, sorry for the Republicans in the room for a quick second. The reason why we rotate through those 3 is because those are 3 cities with big enough venues for all of us that are not in the metro area, which has an increased cost.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the proportional allocation of delegates?
Sure.
The question is about the proportional allocation of delegates.
So like we talked about earlier, the results of the presidential primary are binding. Using the example from earlier, again, if 2 candidates are on the ballot, and the people vote like 50-50 split. That determines how many delegates are given for each candidate.
Isn't there a threshold though?
A threshold for how many you can get to
No, what
be.
percentage of vote you need to earn a delegate at all?
Legally said they
I think that the 15% is for, gets a little confusing. The 15%, if I recall, is to get on the ballot.
No. If there's 5 candidates that get votes, but the 5th one, you know, you got 10, I don't know how many. If that bottom one doesn't get more than 15%, they're off. Those 4 will get, the top 4 will get the spread of delegates.
Even I, who's somewhat of an expert in this, this is new for us this year and how we do things. Previously, everyone who would have been part of that would have gotten delegates.
So when you get to the national convention, let's say it's 50-50, and so Minnesota has whatever number of delegates there, but that's only on the first vote, right? After the first vote, it's up to the individual to decide who they're supporting.
The question has to do with the national convention, and the first vote, people are required to vote for who they represent, who they are a delegate for, and then it does that release them from that obligation on any additional votes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So binds for one vote. Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question.
But we have rarely gone past one vote in,
Modern times.
yeah, since I've been alive.
My question is, how does the DFL party anticipate that the primary election will affect attendance at the local caucus?
We don't know. We're expecting a decreased turnout at caucuses, primarily because the presidential campaigns so far are pushing people to the primaries, as that's where delegates will be given and the number that matters. We have yet to see a whole lot of the presidential campaigns still pushing their people to caucuses. We really don't know how this will affect our caucus turnout. I imagine it will be incredibly decreased, but to which degree is unknown to us at this point. Yeah.
Will you be able to promote the caucus at the primary?
The question is, will the DFL be able, or the parties be able to promote the caucus at the primary?
Well, the caucuses come before the primary,
Well,
so we'll be promoting primary on
that's
caucus
true.
night.
That's
Every
true,
party
sorry.
unit I know, every elected official, every candidate running, we're still very much so pushing for people to attend caucuses. Again, as it is our first step in all 3 channels that you can go into, becoming a party officer, becoming a delegate, or amending the party platform.
This is very, I apologize ahead of time. A lot of handicapped people don't go to the caucus because they can't park close enough. And they just can't make it, so they drive home. And I'm wondering if the parties could work with the cities to somehow have an increased deal just for an event, that event.
So the question has to do with people who are physically disabled and having challenges to get to the caucus. And could the parties perhaps work with the cities and the local officials to make it more accessible? Is that correct?
That would be up to the individual party units who are running the caucuses. I know that we work really hard to be accessible, but even throughout the best planning, something that can be missed. I would encourage everyone to speak to their local party unit chairs and vice chairs if they believe in that. But yes, they can work with the city to try to work out a parking situation that is accessible for all.
Yes.
You know, in the past, with the presidential primary, or at the caucuses, they would do the straw polls, and that would draw a lot of people in. Now that we're not doing that, I can envision maybe some people showing up and not being too happy. Is there any plan to try to get the word out prior to the caucuses, that it's gonna be caucus to run party business only, and there will not be a presidential primary, so the more people running these things don't have to deal with, or reduce the chance of them to deal with angry people.
This is on, the question was about,
Yeah, the question was whether how much publicity will there be that the presidential primary will now take place of the straw voting in the caucuses, so that people don't end up showing up thinking they're going to vote for the president and be angry for the caucus workers. So what is the plan on getting the word out?
this is on everybody, every party unit, every campaign. People and organizations like the League of Women Voters to do the education to the public about the change that we are having this year. I talk about it everywhere I go, even to people that don't want to hear about it. I hope that you do the same, the campaigns will do the same, the party will do the same. The Secretary of State's office is doing everything that they can to get it out there as well. I would be hard pressed on Tuesday, February 25th to find someone that didn't realize we were going to a presidential primary.
There was a question over here. Yes.
I'm just thinking, the fact that the parties are going to get lists of everybody who voted in the PMP, without going door to door, without doing phoning, you know, what party do you support kind of stuff, that the parties are going to have a far bigger list of voters from their own party than they've ever had before.
This will be, the question was about what happens with the lists and when the parties receive the list of who voted in the presidential primary. That's a game changer. That is an unknown. To the best of my knowledge and speaking with state party staff, there's no plan for what we are going to do with that additional information. It is helpful to us, but as of right now, I do not know of any plans on what we plan on doing with that data.
If they send this back, you know, subdivide it back up and send it back to the Senate districts, they will have these lists to call for people to come up to the caucuses. And you might have more people showing up for caucuses than you had in the past.
Except that the caucus is before the primary this year. The caucus is before the primary. Yeah.
Maybe the next one.
Well, they go
Question?
Yes, are you aware of limits on how the DFL can use that voter information list, or how any party can use it?
The question is is the DFL aware of any limits on how this list can be used, or any party can use the list?
I can't speak for the GOP. We have a pretty stringent list policy on what we can do with those lists. We do not give them to other people. We do not sell that information to other organizations, but we do buy information from other places to put into our database. The people that have access to the database are trained volunteers that also agree to and sign our list policy. If someone violates that list policy, they do have access revoked.
I just wanted to respond to the caucuses are all in accessible areas. I think your question is more, can we have more parking spaces set aside for those? And at least for me, I'm part of SG 46. I will be certain to bring that up. I guess it would just be putting some additional signs out there to restrict parking.
So the statement has to do with making sure that the communication is to the party representative that parking needs to be more accessible for the caucus.
To put on my actual day hat for my job, I'm a 911 dispatcher. The party units would just need to speak to the cities themselves and or the police departments to see if they could work out something regarding parking.
So the use of the data related to voters in terms of how protected it is all the result of voluntary restrictions that, in your case, the DFL imposes upon itself with respect to the use of that voter data. Is that correct?
So the question has to do with the restrictions are self-implemented for each party or on how the lists are being used, the voter lists are being used. Is that correct?
And yes, it is self-imposed and not entirely, well, yes, self. The state party has, the DFL terms and conditions, and a list policy. Our database is a part of a larger database with the National Democratic Committee. They have list policies and things in place as well. So it's pretty simple.
Because a portion of the cost is reimbursable for local government, some of those costs associated with all of this is reimbursable. So if would you go then to your local area if you, for example, outreach? Because I agree, the other part of this gentleman's question is that there are a lot of people who don't pay attention to anything until it's time for the presidential election. Then they want to come and they want to be active. So we still want to capture those people who have that cyclical interest. So what kind of outreach, I mean, is some of that cost at the local level reimbursable for outreach? Would that be an allowable cost?
The question has to do with outreach for information and education on the presidential primary versus caucus, and both the availability of both. Is there a reimbursable cost for outreach, for local outreach for people? Is that correct?
That's exactly.
Reimbursable by whom?
Well, if local government can submit costs for reimbursement for their costs, whether it's having more parking zones or whether it's having more buses to get people accessible busing, whatever those costs are that are determined at the local level, is there some kind of restriction on what those allowable costs could or should be?
That is up to the cost of the local party units.
Well, that's so you answered the question.
No, that's the state law.
Accessibility is state law. Anything outside of that.
I'm talking outreach.
Okay.
As you know.
So, yes.
I thought you were talking about the primary though.
Well, no, what I asked the question was, is that if some of these costs associated with the presidential primary are reimbursable at the local level, and there is outreach determined to be important for people to actually get there to participate, can a local unit of government determine that they want to submit for reimbursement on some of those outreach costs?
No, I do not know.
But it's not, that's not a no.
So if I understand your question is the state is reimbursing local governments to run the primary.
Exactly.
So if they are reimbursing local governments to run the primary, is there funds available for local outreach from local government through the state funds that are being
If
reimbursed?
the local unit of government determines that's something they want to invest in, could they give reimbursement?
Not that I'm aware of,
Yeah, that might be something you would check with your local government, whether they have a fund for that kind of thing, and maybe pair up with additional organizations, perhaps. There's your local government.
I cannot imagine
local government in action.
Yeah. I can't imagine a world in which the local government reimburses a local party unit, however, for a partisan cost. Nor should they, I don't think.
I wonder how Minnesota compares with other states. Do other states do the same with primary and caucus?
The question is, I wonder how Minnesota compares to other states. Do other states do primary and caucus primarily?
Some of them do. Most of them have one or the other. Most of them have primaries. There are very few caucus states. And of the other caucus states, they are mostly caucuses for presidential years and races. So it's interesting. We have a unique political system here, which I love. It's frustrating at times, but I do love it.
Is the voter information from the PNP put into the band? And if it's put into the band, which candidates, and when is it determined if that information is shared with the candidates?
He had a question about our internal party database.
Okay.
Let's talk about that offline.
Well, I was going to make a comment on other states. I've lived in Texas, which is a primary state, but they also caucus on primary night. And they use the caucus for party business because parties have business in primary states. Now, I don't know how other states do it. I just know one other one. I'm back here for a reason.
I have a question. Who pays for the caucus?
The parties do.
So then that means that the state is paying for the primary and the party is paying for the caucus. That will definitely decrease the cost that the parties pay for the caucus.
Yes.
No? I don't know.
No, the major cost for the caucuses is renting a room space.
Which will still need, but it's possible some units will need less space this year. I hope.
Maybe.
No one knows. It's a guess, kind of like who survived 2008 caucuses? We talk about 2016 a lot, but does anyone remember that?
Oh, yeah.
I still have nightmares about 2008. I don't know which districts you're from. I live in Senate District 48, which is Eden Prairie. We don't have enough available space for caucuses, and so Democrats and Republicans caucus in the same building, which is the high school. We backed up traffic out of town, down 494, clear to Highway 100, with just people trying to get to caucuses. A lot of districts planned super hard for 2016, and even despite our best efforts, still long lines of people trying to get in and out of caucuses, which never happens in other years. It makes me sad, but removing that extra crush of people trying to get in to vote in a presidential straw poll will be very helpful for the people who are attending caucuses that want to attend all of the precinct caucuses.
Any other questions? Yes.
I've got one more, just, in prior years, those who are not 18 can show up for caucuses if they're going to be 18 by, and eligible to vote by election day. They're not going to be allowed to vote in the primary unless they are 18 by March 3rd.
They will be.
No.
Did you say that earlier, that people that
Yeah, no, if
yeah.
they are 18 by March 3rd, they can vote in the primary. If they're not going to be 18 until sometime between March 3rd and November 3rd, they can go to caucus, is that right?
Right, but they cannot vote in the caucus.
They cannot vote?
No.
Okay.
The question had to do with age, the age of 18, and whether the person can participate in the primary and whether they can participate in the caucus.
They can, if they will be 18 by election day, can participate in the caucus.
Election day being general.
Yes, election day being the general election. For the DFL, I can't speak to.
Actually, I think that's in statute.
And then,
I have one other question. There were a couple people who have never been to a caucus before, and I remember what it was like when I was a new Minnesotan and I'd never heard of caucus before. Can you run through, because this is going to be televised, can you run through very briefly what caucus night looks like and what people can expect when they go and why they should go? Briefly?
yeah. Caucuses are local meetings of local like-minded party people from your neighborhoods, your precinct. Sorry, this is hard shortly. So there's local meetings of like-minded Republicans or Democrats or our two marijuana parties. Why there's two of them, I still don't know. Where people can get together and discuss the issues related to the party platform, to elect party officers, and to elect delegates to move along in the process. Caucuses by state law are on the same date, and they start at the same time at 7 p.m. You can go, sign in, chat with your neighbors a little bit, talk about the issues, talk about candidates, talk about who you think should lead you in the precinct, and then try to move along in the process. The fastest caucus I ever attended was, I think we're done with party business by 7:35. The longest was a caucus I attended in Minneapolis, which went for almost 4 hours. Yay for not living in Minneapolis, don't tell them I said that. So it can be as short as your neighbors want it to be, it can be as long as your neighbors want it to be. What you get out of caucuses is what you and your neighbors put into caucuses. I used to live in a precinct that was very much so in and out. We got in, elected people, voted for things, left. I've seen caucuses where neighbors got together to talk about a wide variety of issues for a long period of time. Everything ranging from local city issues and school board up to what should we do in Iraq. So what you get out of caucuses is what you put into caucuses. But for the two major parties that aren't centered around marijuana, what you will find is people
voting for local party officers, voting for people to attend your next convention, and the beginning of the process to vote for or amend party platforms.
Yes.
One other thing that you vote on at the caucus, they ask for volunteers to be on committees at the Senate District Convention. And I just want to urge people to do that. And for example, I volunteered one year to be on one committee, not knowing the districts were going to change. And when that convention came, I was going to be in a new district where I knew no one. And yet, because I was on this committee that was interviewing all these applicants from the district, it was a great way to get to know my new district. So volunteer for a committee while you're at your district.
There is one last thing that we do talk about on caucus night, and that is signing up to be an election judge, which is very important. On election day, obviously we have the election judges. They also have representatives, usually one from each major party. So on caucus night, that is an opportunity to sign up to say, yes, I would like to be a DFL election judge in my local area.
There's one more, this is going to be our final question. One more question over here. Who is it?
Yeah. So you're talking about amending the party platform. What does the party platform actually affect?
Things that that's a really good question. I talk about this a lot. The party platform is basically a big document of the things that the parties say that they believe in, the things that they want their elected officials to work on, and the things that we hope become legislative priorities for our elected officials. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it doesn't affect any laws or actually...
No, just the things that each individual party believes in and stands behind.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, one more question. I'm sorry. One more question.
How do you find out where they're held?
That's a great question.
That is a great question. The parties usually have them on their websites individually. The Secretary of State's website, which is
mnvotes.sos.
We'll also have a list. Each individual party has until, I think, the end of this month to submit their caucus locations to the Secretary of State, and they will have it on their website, just like they have the poll finder every year.
I would love to answer more questions, but we have to stop. I'm so sorry. What an exciting and wonderful, engaging group you are, and thank you all for participating. And let me just give you my last few comments here. We want to thank the speakers and audience members for their part in today's program. Anytime we can bring information to the voters and help educate them to the process is a winning day for everyone. So thank you to the League of Women Voters of Brooklyn Park, Osseo, Maple Grove, Crystal, New Hope, East Plymouth, Edina, Golden Valley, Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Hopkins, St. Louis Park, South Tonka, and Wayzata, Plymouth area for organizing this excellent event, and all of their members for assisting. Thank you to the City of Golden Valley for hosting the event. Thank you to Dave Kaiser and CCX Media for taping today's program. Replay times are Wednesday, November 13th at 8 p.m. on Channel 20, Thursday, November 14th at 12 p.m. on Channel 20, Saturday, November 16th at 7:30, Channel 859, and Sunday, November 17th at 11:30 on Channel AM, Channel 859. You can always stop me afterwards and ask if I didn't give you enough time to write that down. Please let everyone you know about this. The more people that are informed on presidential primary day and caucus, the better it is for everybody. This program video will be made public on the websites of the League of Women Voters St. Louis Park at www.lwvslp.org, Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Hopkins at www.lwvmph.org, Edina at maybe that's a fly. I'm not going to say it anymore. lwvedina.org, and Wayzata, Plymouth area at lwvwpa.weebly.com. And for more information about the League of Women Voters, please visit the lwvmn.org website or talk to any of our members. I think that is it. And I also want to thank our two students from Hopkins High School, Hannah and Kay, for being here.